Really, I think in order to get a better understanding of this subject, we got to first establish a quick setting of sorts. So most of what we know about the Proto-Indo-Europeans comes from linguistics and archaeology, and both of these disciplines really tell us two things relevant to the discussion. So one, this people was largely pastoral overall, and two, their power structure was likely male-dominated. So with that being said, their words for family and kinship at large are going to reflect these features, most likely, which is like truly remarkable, really, if you think about it, because we are able to discern aspects of a culture that hasn't existed for thousands of years simply by dissecting their lexicon and semantics. I'll show you what I mean right here. Let's look at the word father, just to keep things light. So 5,000 years ago, this word looked something like this. Now, we don't see it today because the word has evolved over time so much, but these words used to have meaning behind their sound. So in this case, linguists believe the word came from this particular root, which we know it had to do something with protection, since most of the later verbs that descend from it are used in phrases about, herding livestock, or like a king being the shepherd of his people, per se. Now recall, I said that this was a male-dominated pastoral society, right? So it makes tenable sense, at least in my head, that the father was seen as the protector or the herdsman of the family. Alright, but what about the rest of the family? What were their roles as far as we can tell through the study of comparative linguistics? Well, here we have a standard Proto-Indo-European family chart with the reconstructed sounds. And notice how most of these share the same end segment, ter, yet only father and daughter share an accent mark on the affix. This is actually quite important it's in phonetics. Stress can potentially affect two things for a word, actually, its meaning and its evolution. So why does only the reconstructed terms for father and daughter share this accent mark, but not mother and brother, you might be asking? Well, Danish linguist Birgit Anette Olsen argues this is likely because the words for mother and brother were sort of modified with this ending at a later stage. She says possibly the original word for mother was a nursery one, so like mama in instance for English, which was later influenced by the formal term for father. But this isn't to say there wasn't a nursery term for father as well. In fact, we know of the Hittite atash and the Gothic ata, sort of like the English papa or dad. What Olsen is simply suggesting here is that the Proto-Indo-European word for mother possibly started out as a diminutive and then formalized with the ending later on in a sort of process of assimilation. This would explain the difference in stress, phonetically speaking. On the other side of things, the case for brother is just a bit more complicated. So there's notable evidence that this term used to go beyond the bounds of quote-unquote blood relation. As we know, the Indo-Europeans who migrated across Western Europe during the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age had developed a kind of warrior aristocracy. So just think about the implications here. This society was constantly competing for resources and power. That was their culture. And for this very reason, some linguists actually argue that its root meant something like fighter, or more fittingly, brothers in arms. In most ancient Indo-European societies, brother was a term not exclusive to a sibling. It also applied to your paternal cousins as well. Or just more generally someone you fought with in battle. And I mean, that's still a common thing to this day, to refer to a person you trust with your life on the battlefield, literally or metaphorically, as a brother. And just to add to all this, there's a multitude of cognate terms across the Indo-European languages that denote brotherhood in a sense of comradeship rather than just blood sibling. All of these connections sort of insinuate that the original meaning of brother was someone who fought with another. We're just in a situation where the proto-reconstruction remains kind of unclear is all. And I suppose over time, its semantic meaning just kind of gradually narrowed to the point we understand it today as just primarily a male sibling. Interestingly, there's no uniform word for son across the later Indo-European languages, but I don't find this too surprising, because when you consider how important sons were to a family in this culture, in this society, one could imagine an abundance of epithets and titles and just words in general that probably existed throughout the language. However, what does seem to be the case is that most are covered by derivatives of this root with different suffixes attached to it, which meant to bear, as in like to bear something or to carry. Another root that's moderately attested is this one too, though for the most part I believe it's more so means a young boy. So if I'm not mistaken, its literal meaning has something to do with animals. It'd be like a father calling his son a young pup, I suppose. Now, daughter is a more safely attested uniform term, but its root is more contentious, is fair, I think, to say, than most of the other ones. One theory is that it comes from a root that roughly indicates one who milks, as in like a milkmaid for the livestock, pretty much. But this is not widely agreed upon by any means. Do not take that as a certainty, please. I'm not Moses presenting the Ten Commandments here. Really, the only thing we're certain about is the sound of behind the word instead of the meaning itself. The root word for sister is thought to contain this pronominal stem, and according to another Danish linguist, Michael Janda, the word simply stood for young women in the family. So yeah, nothing too out of the norm here, really. Now, it's important to know that not only was this group patriarchal, they were also patrilineal as well. These are two different things. Sometimes they get conflated because of their prefix, but what this means fundamentally is that something is passed through a father's line. So whether that be inheritance, maybe familial descent, or both, really. And as you can imagine, this might complicate the family structure just a bit, because not only are you competing outwardly in society against these male figures, they're also competing inwardly or internally against your own brothers, which again, not only meant your actual siblings, but also your paternal cousins as well. All right, but why just paternal cousins? Why not the maternal side of things? Well, because in a patrilineal society, you are not competing against the maternal side of the family. You are competing against the paternal side. So the men in your mother's family were not seen as threats to you by any means. This is very evident in the later Indo-European myths, like Beowulf being raised by his maternal grandfather, for example. Even Tacitus writes about this in his work on the Germanic people, I think in roughly the 1st century AD. But he says, the sons of sisters are as highly honored by their uncles as by their own fathers. Some even regard this relation as more sacred and binding, and prefer it in receiving hostages. They think that this gives them a stronger hold on the affections and a wider bond for the family. And this is even further justified by the term nepots. Most words that descend from this one assume the meaning sister's son, like the Latin nepos and the Old English nepha. Some scholars interpret the original meaning as a minor without power, basically, hence a member of the household that posed no threat to someone's inheritance, or just the internal hierarchy in general, I suppose. Of course, over time, this meaning broadened quite extensively. It's actually where the English nephew and niece come from. But it seems safe to say that the relationship between a boy and his mother's brother was a bit different from that of his father's brother. The linguistic clues concerning marriage point to a patrilocal type of family structure here. Yes, another patra prefix, I know, but that is to say, marriages were seen from the point of view of the man, at least linguistically. So the English term wedding actually comes from the proto-verb wed, meaning to lead. And as J.P. Mallory points out, this suggests that the residence rules of the Proto-Indo-Europeans involved the woman going to live in the house of her husband or with his family. It is also widely believed in academia that these people paid a dowry or a bride price for their spouse. But to me, this seems kind of mainly based on later Indo-European practices more than anything. So I would take that with a grain of salt, personally. Unfortunately, linguists have yet to find common ancestral terms for husband and wife, but widow is actually well attested, weirdly enough. Its earliest meaning is thought to be the allotted one, as in she is allotted to the brother of the deceased husband. Consequently, he would take care of her and the kid if there is one. And this isn't really all that unusual, really. I mean, it's actually fairly common in patrilocal societies for this to be the case. Also, bear in mind that this is one of Olsen's newer interpretations, so you probably wouldn't find this one scoured over the internet or something like that yet. As for in-laws, it seems that male figures stress the importance of alliances through marriage. Note the Greek word for father-in-law contains a root word meaning bind. And as we mentioned earlier, multiple times, this was a people frequently involved in conflict, warrior aristocracy of sorts. So it's not all that surprising we find that the byproduct of marriage was securing loyalty from the wife's family. Conversely, from the wife's perspective, we find more neutral terms for her husband's family, none of which have anything to do with binding or the like. So what did I want to demonstrate here today? What I wanted to show you all really was that their terminology of kinship and their social structure at large was almost exclusively based from a male perspective. And not only that, there was also a clear systemic struggle for power between the males on a paternal side of the family. It was quite literally embedded in their language, as we can see. All things considered, the family structure of the Proto-Indo-Europeans looks something like this. You got the father as the protector, or the shepherd of the household. You have the brothers locked in a constant struggle for power against one another, though they also fought on the battlefield alongside one another as well. And finally, the mothers and the daughters likely tended to the children and the animals, though that last bit's just more so guesswork at this point. Moreover, it's believed brother was an umbrella term that also included your father's brother's sons, as well as just people you fought with whenever and wherever. There's a strong possibility that the term cousin strictly referred to your maternal side of the family originally. And again, from the perspective of a boy, the men on your mother's side of the family would have been seen as trustworthy usually, as can be seen from the term nepots. Which is actually what the term nepotism comes from, by the way. And this is because the patrilineal order was not at risk, so to speak. Something else I really should have pointed out earlier was that none of these are loan words from other cultures, as far as we could tell. Inherently, this implies that the European farmers had little to no influence on their social layout when both cultures encountered one another following the migration, which is kind of incredible, honestly. If I didn't mention something here, that's either because it wasn't well attested in scholarship, or I just found it too redundant or self-evident to mention, I suppose. I'll be sure to throw down my sources down below, like always, speaking of which. Well, it is springtime here in eastern Oklahoma. Pretty soon all of this around me will be green once more. And I think that'll do it for this one. Hope you learned a thing or two about a thing or two, and I appreciate you for watching.